What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The West Virginia Mountaineers are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what West Virginia did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for West Virginia. My projection for this team was 8-4, and then my prediction for them was 7-5. But West Virginia went under that compared to the projection and the prediction last year. West Virginia, I wouldn't say coming off a disappointing year. They were a solid team. You know, they had a pretty up and down season. Let's just put it that way. It was a pretty solid season, but they went 6-6 in the regular season. But if then you count the bowl game loss at the end of the year, this team went 6-7 overall. So a solid season for West Virginia, but it was kind of way under what they did, the year before in 2023. But you look at the schedule from last year, it was kind of a tough schedule for them, especially in the non-conference, and then the Big 12 games were kind of tough for them as well. And of course, some of these teams in the Big 12 ended up being as good as maybe we thought they wouldn't be. So looking at the non-conference, they did, of course, have to play Penn State out of the Big 10. That game was not really that close, to be honest. They got beat in that game, I believe, like 34-12 or something. And then they also played Albany. That was probably the easiest non-conference game on the schedule. And then they played Pittsburgh out of the ACC. So a couple of Power 4 teams in that non-conference schedule. It made the non-conference schedule for West Virginia a lot tougher. Then we go to the Big 12 games. We'll start with their home games in the Big 12 last year. They played Kansas, Iowa State, Kansas State, Baylor, and then also UCF. So they played 5 home games last year in the Big 12, it looks like. And then on the road, they played Oklahoma State, Arizona, Cincinnati, and Texas Tech. So they did lose to Iowa State, Kansas State, and Baylor all at home last year. Iowa State ended up being a big surprise, which I knew they were going to be good, but I didn't expect them to be very good. Baylor was a big surprise team. They were a pretty decent team. Kansas State was also a pretty decent team as well, so those 3 teams were actually pretty good. And then Texas Tech had a better season compared to 2023. And of course, the wins that they had on the road, those teams, Arizona, Cincinnati, those were not too good teams last year, but Oklahoma State ended up not being as good as we thought they were going to be. So yeah, they had a tough schedule last year, especially in the non-conference. So what does it look like now for 2025? This is the schedule for West Virginia. Before we go game by game, though, let's take a look at who West Virginia's non-conference opponents will be in 2025. This is their non-conference schedule. They will play Robert Morris on the road at Ohio out of the MAC, and then they play Pittsburgh again. So basically, Pittsburgh is a game that they play every year since they brought this rivalry back and everything, and they will play the Panthers here at home on September the 13th, which I already saw the date for it. So yeah, that's going to be like a revenge game there for West Virginia. They lost to them on the road last year. This year they play them at home. So that's your big non-conference game out of the Power 4. And then you got Robert Morris. Should be a pretty easy game for West Virginia, but you got Ohio here out of the MAC, which is not a bad team. They were actually one of the top, MAC teams out of that conference last year. So yeah, the Bobcats of Ohio, this will not be a pretty easy game here for West Virginia. They'll obviously still be favored, but by how much? I mean, that's going to be the question there. It could only be by at least like 6 or 7 points, or maybe by double digits, but I'm telling you, that game is not going to be an easy one, and with it being on the road, that could be a tricky one as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw West Virginia kind of struggle against Ohio, but that's your non-conference schedule. Let's now take a look at their home games in the Big 12. They will play Utah, TCU, Colorado, and Texas Tech. So they play 4 home games in the Big 12 this year. Utah wasn't really good last year. We'll see if they can turn things around. TCU should be a pretty competitive game. Colorado's not going to be as good as they were last year, but that's still a pretty talented team. And then Texas Tech, they're a pretty decent team, of course, in the Big 12 every year, and that's a home game there for West Virginia. So that game against Texas Tech will be a big revenge game. I don't remember if they played TCU last year either. I don't think they did. So yeah, they'll play TCU at home this year, and then they got Colorado. So that's your home schedule. Not a bad home schedule here for West Virginia. Let's now take a look at their road games in the Big 12. They will play on the road at Kansas, at BYU, at UCF, and then Houston, and then also Arizona State. So you look at this road schedule, it's a little bit tricky. Winnable games against Kansas, UCF, UCF in Houston. BYU will be a pretty tough one there on the road. I mean, it's not a tough place to play, but BYU was pretty good last year. I kind of expect them to be pretty good again this year in 2025. And then Arizona State, maybe they're not quite as good as they were last year, but that's on the road. That's a very tough place to play. Arizona State, though, is a really well-coached team. We've known about that since last year. So, yeah, Arizona State will be probably their toughest road game. But the rest of these road games, maybe except, I think they can beat BYU, but the rest of the 3 games, Kansas, UCF, and Houston, those are winnable games here that West Virginia can win here on the road. So that's your away schedule. Let's go back to the schedule now and go full game by game now for the Mountaineers. They will start things off with Robert Morris on August 30th, and then after that it's a road game against Ohio on September 6th. Like I said, probably not going to be a guaranteed win there for West Virginia against the Bobcats. Again, Ohio is a pretty good team out of the MAC. We'll see what happens in that game. And then they got Pittsburgh at home after that on September 13th. So they play all 3 of their non-conference opponents in the first 3 weeks, and then they jump right into Big 12 play. They'll open things up with Kansas on the road on September 20th. And then they got Utah after that on September 27th. And then they play BYU on the road on October 3rd. That game, of course, will be on a Friday. And then their first bye week comes right before playing another road game, and it's going to be against UCF. They'll play them on October 18th. So they got back-to-back road games there with BYU and UCF, but it's in between the bye weeks, so these back-to-back road games are in between a bye week, so they don't have to, go back-to-back on road trips. And then after that, it's TCU at home on October 25th. Then they go back on the road to play Houston on November 1st. Then they got Colorado at home on November 8th, and then it's on the road at Arizona State on November 15th. And then their second bye week comes right before playing their last game of the regular season. They will close things out with Texas Tech on November 29th. So the bye weeks are kind of in a weird spot. I do like the first bye, though, before going back on the road again. But, yeah, that second bye, you kind of rather have it maybe before going on the road to play Arizona State, or even against Colorado for that matter. But, yeah, one back-to-back road game trip. I mean, it's in between a bye week, but this schedule kind of sets up well here for West Virginia. I mean, they could probably have an even average type season, like go 50-50 perhaps. But let's now get to the projection and find out. This is the scale that I'll be using here for their official projection. Basically, if it's a 1% game in the red, that's pretty much going to be counted as an automatic loss. 20% in the orange, that's where West Virginia is going to be a double-digit underdog in that percentage. 40% in the yellow, they'll be about a clear underdog, so about 6 or 7 points. So less than a touchdown in that percentage. 50-50 games will stay in the white. That's really much games that can go either way. 60% in the purple, that's where West Virginia will be favored by less than a touchdown, so 6 or 7 points, just like the yellow games. And then 80% in the blue, just like the orange, they'll be favored by double digits. And then 99% in the green, that's pretty much your guaranteed wins and also automatic wins. So we'll start with the easy wins here for West Virginia. And really, you only got one of them, and that's Robert Morris here on August 30th. Yeah, that game right there, West Virginia definitely should be able to take care of business against that FCS team and Robert Morris. I think this game is definitely over that 95 to 99% range. And I'm actually going to put the Ohio game here in the blue. And I know this sounds crazy, but again, I think West Virginia might struggle in this game. You never know about the Bobcats. They were really good last year. Maybe they're not quite as good as they were last season, because this is just a look back at how the teams finished in 2025. But as of right now, I think Ohio might be actually really good this year. And again, they were one of the top teams out of the MACs, and there's a lot of good MAC teams in that conference. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if West Virginia did struggle in this game. It could also be in the purple, where they're just favored by 6 or 7 points. But as of right now, I'm going to put this in the blue, where I think West Virginia is favored by double digits. It's not a guaranteed win, but it's still counted as a win nonetheless here in this projection. The green and blue games count as wins, and then we go to the games where I think West Virginia is going to be favored by less than a touchdown. Really not a lot of those either, but they got one game where I think they'll be favored by 6 or 7 points. That's going to be against Utah here on September 27th. Now, if this game was on the road, it would definitely be a 50-50 game, but because it's at home here for West Virginia, and just based off of how the teams finished overall in the standings in the Big 12, West Virginia, as of right now, looks like the better team. Not saying they're the more talented team, because Utah can definitely turn things around in 2025. They can have a better season, but with it being at home and just based off of how the teams finished last year, West Virginia, I think, will be favored by 6 or 7 points. So those are all the games that West Virginia Virginia will be favored in. Let's now go to the games where I think they're going to be underdogs. They're not in the red or the orange, though. I think basically almost every Big 12 game for West Virginia is pretty even. Maybe except for these two, though, BYU and Arizona State. I think the Mountaineers will be 6 or 7 point underdogs against BYU and Arizona State. Both of these games are on the road. That's the reason why they fall in the yellow. And they're kind of a tier above West Virginia. If these two games were at home for West Virginia, yeah, they definitely would be 50-50 games, and they would definitely have a pretty good shot to pull off some upsets here. But, you know, they're in the yellow, so that still does give them a chance here to pull off an upset. Again, they'll be just a 6 or 7 point underdog. It's not that high of a spread, to be honest. But, yeah, I think BYU and Arizona State, you know, as of right now, they're kind of a tier above West Virginia. And again, if both of these games were at home here for the Mountaineers, they would definitely be in the white. But as of right now, they're both on the road, and that's not going to change, obviously. We know that. But, you know, they're both on the road. That's the reason why they drop into the yellow. And by the way, I meant to change my projection for BYU at 10-2. Arizona State, though, is still a 9-3 projection. So once we complete all these Power 4 team-by-team projections, we'll go over the standings, and I'll show you the difference here, you know, from the projection earlier, and then change it obviously with their projected record. But yeah, those two games, West Virginia will be a 6 or 7 point underdog in both of them, and then that's going to leave you with a lot of 50-50 games. Pittsburgh, Kansas, UCF, TCU, Houston, Colorado, and Texas Tech. These are all games that really can go either way. So 7 total 50-50 games. I think they're all pretty even matchups. I think West Virginia might actually be a better team than UCF and Houston, but you know, those two games are on the road. That's the reason why they both fall into that 50-50 category. So yeah, West Virginia, these are all your 50-50 games. So what does the projection look like here for the Mountaineers based on how tough this schedule is? Well, we count that one green game as a win, and then also the blue game as a slight win. You average out the purple game against Utah at 60%, average out the two games in the yellow at 40%, and then average out all these 7 50-50 games at 50%. And let's say they do this. Let's say they win 3 out of the 7 50-50 games. They lose 4 50-50 games, they win 3 of them, and then they probably pull off an upset in one of those 2 yellow games, either against BYU or in Arizona State. That's going to give you a total of 7 wins, including the green game against Robert Morris, and then the blue game against Ohio, and then they'll obviously be favored against Utah, and then that's going to give you like 3 more total wins in that 50-50 range, and then plus the yellow game. That's going to give you a projection of 7-5. So I think that's a pretty fair projection for West Virginia. Again, if you split the 50-50 games, let's say they win 3 of them, they're obviously going to be favored against Utah, but they'll probably win one of those 2 yellow games against BYU or Arizona State. That's going to give you a total of 7 wins, and then you're going to lose like probably one of those yellow games and then lose 4 50-50 games. That's how you get the projection of 7-5. And I think worst case for West Virginia, it has to be 6-6, just like where they were last year, but best case is probably 8-4. If they go 8-4, that's definitely an improvement from where they were last year, but 7-5 won't be really that bad either for West Virginia. I kind of expect this team to make it to a bowl game, though, at least for 2025, but we'll see if they can also come a dark horse team in the Big 12. But that is my projection here for West Virginia. Do you guys agree or disagree with this projection? Let me know your thoughts about West Virginia down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.